Everyone, a very good morning, afternoon, and evening to our wonderful audience joining us from all around the world. And to all our viewers in the United States, we wish you a safe and happy Independence Day as United States is celebrating its 244th anniversary of independence today. Welcome to the 6th virtual panel discussion hosted by America's Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society in Los Angeles, a member of the Photographic Society of America, PSA, and the International Federation of Photography of Art in France, FIAP, to highlight the beauty of Sri Lanka's fauna and flora. I'm your host, Wijeyeratne. We are streaming live from Los Angeles, California, USA, and connecting with our panelists in Sri Lanka and in the United Kingdom. This week's episode will feature the Sri Lankan leopard, Panthera pardus kotiya, a leopard subspecies endemic to Sri Lanka, classified as an endangered species by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, ICUN. To lead this crucial discussion, we have two panelists who are experts on all facets of today's topic. As we go through our panel discussion today, we welcome our viewers to view this great presentation and at the same time, send us questions for our panelists, and we will try our best to include those questions in our Q&A forum. Thank you. So let's get to know our panelists today. Our first panelist is Mr. Rukshan Jayewardene. Rukshan Jayewardene earned a Master of Philosophy in South Asian Archaeology from the University of Cambridge. He has 14 years of experience in the field of archaeology, focusing on early historic period of Sri Lanka. For the past 25 years, he has been a wildlife photographer, writer on wildlife-related topics, and a promoter of Sri Lanka's amazing biodiversity. He has intensively studied the Sri Lankan leopard in the wild. The exposure from this journey inspired Rukshan to work for its long-term conservation. Over a 20-year period, he has been involved with 5 non-profit conservation environmental organizations and like-minded individuals who share the common goal of preserving this at-risk wild animal. Rukshan continues to fight for avoidable biodiversity loss in order to conserve the common heritage of all Sri Lankans. He sees the current decade, beginning with year 2020, being a decisive decade for the Sri Lankan leopard, both in and outside legally protected areas, along with codependent animals of the same ecosystem. So Rukshan, we warmly welcome you to this timely discussion. So this is the opportunity for us to get to know about the behavior of leopards and why we need to emphasize on conservation of leopards, and also learn some really good photographic tips from you to photograph them in their natural habitat. So I'm opening the forum to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Medini. If I would like to go straight into a small presentation I have. So the Sri Lankan leopard has to be seen in the context of the leopard as a species. The Sri Lankan leopard is a subspecies of the species that is known as Panthera pardus, and the Sri Lankan leopard is Panthera pardus kotiya, or the entire species, that is has a worldwide distribution. I can just show you. Okay, this shows you the distribution of the leopard, both extant, that means existing today. Also, possibly extant is the dark green, which means the leopard is, they're not sure whether it still lives in those lands. And the light green is where the leopard is known to actually exist. And then the light yellow is they think it's possibly extinct or it's gone from those lands. And definitely extinct is the dark yellow. So this is the species that is split into 9 subspecies, and Sri Lanka's subspecies is just one. India has another subspecies. Africa has its own subspecies. The African subspecies possibly might be split into another subspecies, but there isn't enough work in a continent like Africa to say that definitely the leopard is one subspecies or not. But all these subspecies basically are split along due to small genetic anomalies that you find in their mitochondrial DNA. And those small differences or those variances actually lead to certain morphological differences. But in fact, a leopard anywhere in the world is immediately recognizable as a leopard because it really cannot be confused with another cat. Except one exception is a jaguar, which actually looks much like the leopard, but it's not closely related in the sense that the jaguar isn't derived from the leopard or the leopard derived from the jaguar. They are both parallelly evolved cats existing in a similar kind of range of habitats. And the leopard is a pantherine cat, which there are 5 species: a lion, tiger, jaguar, snow leopard, and leopard are these pantherine cats. And the snow leopard and the leopard are probably closely related, but now they're looking at the genetics and they're finding that perhaps not as close as they thought previously. So that's just a slide to show you what the variance in leopards looks like. This is probably one of the more accurate paintings done recently. It's from a book introductory book on leopards and cats. On the top is an African leopard. There isn't a Sri Lankan leopard here, but the Sri Lankan leopard's coloration is more like the Amur leopard, or kind of a richer yellow, a tawny kind of, it's not a pale coat, it's a darker coat. And the Amur leopard, or what they call the Siberian leopard, is it's not, how can I say? It's the 4th from the top on the left, 4th down. So it's the penultimate. It's, if you were to, there's no way that I can really point to it, can I? So, and black leopards or melanistic leopards also occur in populations of normally colored leopards, and that can happen just about anywhere in the leopard's range. But there is a high incidence of black leopards being born in Malaysia, in the Malay Peninsula, and it is dependent on habitat adaptations and survival of the fittest, and it is a genetic anomaly that brings out this dark coat color, and it is not a separate subspecies, it's just a genetic double recessive gene. So that I think enough of that. So we'll go on to the next slide. Infancy is, well, a leopard begins its life as a very small, when it's born what's called immature, kind of much like a human child, but even more small in relation to the mother's size. That is because the leopard is a predator and it needs to hunt. And if a leopard mother is very pregnant, heavy with pregnancy, she cannot effectively hunt. So all cats that hunt or animals that are predators that need to run, chase, and be very agile to be able to bring down their prey need to have short-term pregnancies. So the leopard's pregnancy is 3 months long. And so when the leopard does give birth to cubs, they are born blind and pretty helpless. They cannot move around for the first few days, so they stay very close to the mother, though the mother does have to go out hunting, and at that time they're very vulnerable. But on the mother's milk and later on meat, they grow very fast. And in 3 months' time, they are pretty active and they can follow the mother around. But by the time they're 6 weeks old, they can actually come out of the den site and explore a little. But up until they are about 6 months, they are very vulnerable to other predators as well as other non-predator enemies, actually the prey of leopards as well. Because if a wild boar sees a young leopard, it will kill it on sight. So growing. The closest bond that leopards have is with their mothers, and their next closest bond is with their siblings. So this is a leopard mother and a fairly grown cub, about almost a year old or 10 months old, trying to suckle from her. But she, of course, does not have milk at that stage. So this is just this close mother-child bond that continues till almost independence. So they do spend time stalking and learning to hunt, and what better target or kind of mock prey animal than your own mother. So this is what this leopard cub is doing. And this is a sibling bond between a brother and a sister. The brother is standing, the sister is on her back, and she is typically in a defensive posture, and he is mock attacking her, and she is doing a mock defense, but the claws are retracted, that is inside the sheaths, so that though she kicks with her rear legs or hind legs in the way she would if she was to actually defend herself from attack, there is no damage done to the kind of would-be attacker. So territoriality. Territoriality is extremely important to leopards because they actually partition their landscape, or their land tenure is female territories overlain by male territories, and the female territories kind of are adjacent to each other, and male territories basically encompass 2 or more female territories, so they are larger, and both males and females will defend their territories quite aggressively if need be, and even fight to the death if the intruder, the one who crosses into your territory, does not leave and there is a face-to-face confrontation. But they do everything possible to avoid face-to-face confrontation because no leopard can afford to get wounded, injured, fighting each other. So they leave a lot of calling cards, scent marks, and those scent marks are picked up by others, or you also can pick up your own scent mark and see whether it needs renewing or it is still strong enough. And these scent marks convey, these scents convey a lot to a leopard because it processes this scent in something called the Jacobson's organ, and that enables the leopard to know whether the author of that scent is age, sex, perhaps readiness to mate, various information that is processed, and the leopard is aware of the author of that scent. And here a leopard is smelling perhaps its own scent mark and then reapplying it by rubbing the top of the head, the back of the ear, because there are scent glands there. They climb rocks because they want a vantage point. They want a commanding place to look at the landscape from. Here in Sri Lanka, behaviorally, leopards are different because they do get up to prominent places and are there in the daytime, open place where they can be spotted from a distance. This would be risky behavior in Africa and would be risky behavior for a leopard in India, because the leopard has to contend with a larger predator in both those, in that subcontinent of India as well as in Africa. And throughout most of its range, they have to share space with this larger cat. And a leopard will be pursued and killed if caught by a tiger, and same with lions. And lions are cooperative hunters and social hunters. So it's just not one lion that threatens a leopard at a given time. It's more than one. You know, pride, maybe two sisters. So those are problems of leopards. But leopards have other strategies to escape. But in Sri Lanka, since the tiger, we believe, lived here till about 6,000 years ago and gone extinct since then, the leopard has got used to being the apex predator. And so its behavior is quite different. And that is a leopard up on the same rock before dawn. It's still dark. And what you saw earlier, the eyes shining, is the light reflecting off what's called the tapetum lucidum. That is a reflective surface at the back of the eye, back of the eyeball. So the light travels through the retina, hits that, and it's a light intensifying area. And the leopard has what's called cones favoring over rods. Rods favoring cones. Cones are for color vision, and rods are for night vision or low light vision. So a leopard's eye has great low light capability, but it also has very good daytime vision, and they see in what's called complex grayscale, not just black and white as we understand. And complex grayscale is just as good as color to differentiate different objects, different things at different distances. But perhaps the leopards do see a primary color like red other than grayscale. So that is a new theory. It's something that I subscribe to as much as anybody else. And there are certain clear indications that the leopard and even the lion might see the color red. So this is scent marking, territoriality, previously sniffing the scent. It's a male, this is a female. They scrape the soil with their hind legs and leave a scrape mark behind. It also leaves a scent mark with that scrape. And she's checking for scent. She's also spraying, tail raised, quivering, tail raised vertically, quite rigid, and the tip quivers. If you have any domestic cats and you have seen what domestic cats do, they do exactly the same thing. And both males and females spray and scent mark. Fighting, important because they're territorial and they need to protect their territory, and they keep renewing those scent marks. Signposts sometimes are droppings or fecal deposits, and those things too convey a lot of information to another leopard. Here two young males meet each other face to face. They are hostile to each other. It's unlikely that they're related, but they did have a very severe, bitter fight after this. We witnessed just that one instance. 3 times they tangled with each other, actually came to physical blows or contact, but that contact can easily wound each one quite, they can get mortal wounds. And you can see that tension and the thickness of the neck. They have flexed their neck in readiness for doing battle. And that is two leopards actually fighting. I have to thank a photographer, a friend called Sanka Vanyachi, who kindly gave me this slide to use. And that is a young male on its back, older male rearing over it, and they had several physical clashes, and with all four legs in the air and the paws spread and the claws out, and that is a defense they use even against a lion effectively. And even most times you see leopards get into that position and a lion can't do much, because to get in close would mean to get seriously wounded. So interactions with other animals, buffalo, much larger mammal, and leopards are curious. That circle, within the circle is the leopard, behind the buffalo watching. The buffalo is distracted by me, the photographer, so he is not aware that the leopard is that close, but the leopard is curious and not hunting the buffalo, but wanted to get up close. The wind is right for the leopard. The wind is actually carrying that day from the buffalo and the leopard to us. So if we had the acuity or the sense of smell that is so sensitive that a buffalo has, we could have smelt that leopard, though we were 20 meters away. And the buffalo can certainly smell a leopard at 20 meters and much further away. The leopard's sense of smell is not that great. It uses sight and hearing to hunt. And this is another interaction. This is a courting couple of leopards on the left. And on the right is an elephant drinking from a water hole. And the elephant is acutely aware of the leopards. They do not like leopards, though a leopard cannot seriously threaten an elephant, not even a baby elephant, because it doesn't get the chance to get close with the tightly knit family groups. But tigers and lions do cause elephant deaths, and they do hunt young elephants. The one animal that the leopard has a serious rivalry or uneasy relationship with in the wilds in Sri Lanka is the sloth bear. There are records of encounters where bears and leopards have actually come to blows and fought and wounded each other severely. Neither animal will back down, and they can both cause terrific damage to each other, and both have on occasion died. So their strategy, especially the leopard strategy, is to avoid clashing with a sloth bear at all costs. Hunting, the spotted deer in Sri Lanka is the main prey animal, and strangulation or suffocation is the method that the leopard kills larger animals than itself. These two animals are about the same size, the predator and prey. And this is a deer, spotted deer stag that is actually larger than the leopard that is killing it. So leopard is a technician in the way it hunts, and it has a rasp-like tongue that it can lick and remove meat off the bone. It has carnassials or jaw teeth, they're like mini mountain ranges. Then they are like meat shears. They kind of slide past each other, and they can use those to crack long bones like this leopard is doing. And they consume almost the entire prey of the entire body of that animal, except for the hooves, if in the case of a deer, and the skull and the antlers. Courtship, leopards periodically during the year, they pair up and mate more than once if they are available, as far as their, breeding cycle, or whether they are receptive and females become receptive. They do a lot of scent marking that announces that receptivity to a neighboring male. And the males are much larger than the females, as you can see here and here. And the male on the right of what you can see, and the female on the left. And that is the sexual dimorphism that you see from early on, from the time they're siblings or littermates. The male cubs outgrow the females very quickly from a young age, and that size difference of 30 to 50% stays throughout life. That is courtship, mating. It's a pain-induced ovulation that takes place. So the egg is released during the act of mating, so that there is a greater chance that there is fertilization. And since it's pain-induced, there is pain, and the female will roll on her back and strike at the male, who jumps to get away. Other behavior, they're extremely agile. This leopard is practically airborne. In fact, Gehan, who is here today, my co-speaker, was there at when this happened. And you can see this young female is jumping from one branch to another. Only, there's no other big cat that can do this. Smaller cats can, and squirrels and other animals that have spent all their time arboreally or in trees can do it. But this cat, the leopard, even as an adult, even as a big male, is very agile in trees. It is the one big cat that is at home in the trees as much as it is on ground. And other behavior, stretching, very important. Unlike us, they don't, from a sedentary position, they don't get moving immediately and run the risk of pulling muscles or whatnot. They stretch very deliberately, and there are many poses that they stretch almost every muscle, every part of their body. So that is characteristic of all cats, and that is also what makes them so athletic and agile. And rolling, and it's rolling and picking up some scent from the ground. Thank you. I think I overran a bit, perhaps.
Thank you, Rukshan. If you can go back to our panel screen, that would be great.
Will do.
Well, of course, now I have the opportunity to introduce our second panelist today, Mr. Gehan de Silva Wijeyeratne. Mr. Gehan de Silva Wijeyeratne is amongst a handful of field naturalists in the world who have written and photographed field guides spanning terrestrial mammals, marine mammals, birds, butterflies, dragonflies, wildflowers, and trees. He is a passionate naturalist who has drawn global attention to the richness of Sri Lanka's wildlife through 15 books and numerous articles. In the words of British author and television presenter on wildlife Bill Oddie, no single individual has done tremendous international promotion to raise the profile of a country's wildlife portfolio as Gehan. Gehan is on the Council of the London Natural History Society, and he's the chair of a section of the London Bird Club. He's also a trustee of the British Ornithologists Club. So, Gehan, you're joining us from the United Kingdom. Welcome to today's episode. We would like to know from you how the leopards became a wildlife tourism icon of Sri Lanka from a branding perspective.
Thank you, Medini, and thank you, Surya, for inviting me to present today. Can I just double check that you all are seeing my screen and everything is okay?
Yes, we see that you have started to share the screen, Gehan. We still don't have the first slide yet. It is coming through, I believe.
Okay, just give me a thumbs up when the screen share has come through.
You're good. You're good to go. You're good to go.
Right. Okay, so In my talk, I'm actually going to have a different direction of travel. We had this wonderful talk from Rukshan about what leopards are and behavior and what makes them tick. I'm going to be talking about how they were effectively monetized. How did they become a tourism asset for Sri Lanka, and what was the role they played in branding Sri Lanka as a big game safari destination and as a top all-round wildlife destination. So in my presentation, I'm going to draw heavily on the work done by a very talented artist and designer called Chandrika Malge, who worked with the Copyline team, including people like Tilak Conrad and Chandrika Malge, Keith Blom and Tilak Conrad. It's really the efforts of a number of people. So there are two things I would be hammering across in this presentation. The first is that photography is a powerful tool. And secondly, I hope there are generic lessons to be learned from anybody who's trying to brand and market a product. And in particular, there will be lessons to be learned for people in tourism. So in 2002, when I joined Jetwing, tourism was in a dire state. Sri Lanka was battling the LTT and hotel occupancies were low. Hiran Kure had foreseen the need for a specialist wildlife tourism subsidiary and also to make the Jetwing Group more environmentally sustainable and also to develop the hotels to be wildlife friendly. So there was a need to develop wildlife tourism products. So he brought me in because he knew I was interested in wildlife and he knew that I had city scales. This was quite a gamble. Some people thought it was more reckless than bold, that you're bringing in somebody who had worked in the city in London to develop wildlife tourism. And there was a lot of concern and skepticism when I was talking about Sri Lanka's potential for leopard safaris and other wildlife. And in fact, some of the senior staff were concerned that we may be telling dodgy stories to the tour operators and the media if we started to talk about how good Sri Lanka was for this type of wildlife. So Hiran Kure suggested that the way to settle it was that because Jetwing hotels had a meeting every 2 months where the general managers and senior managers came for a meeting, he said that he will have the next one in Yala, in what was then known as the Yala Safari Beach Hotel. And he said, Gehan can show leopards if there are leopards to be seen in Sri Lanka, and let's resume the dialogue then. So that was a big success. I was able to show leopards to everybody who turned up, and everybody embraced the idea. And Lalin Dimel, who had about 20 years of experience at senior levels in hotels, immediately began to run advertisements like this one, both in the local press and in the foreign press. Now, there were a number of stages that we went through, and we went through this again when we were branding the elephant gathering. And this summarizes some of the key attributes I've identified as being necessary for developing wildlife products. So if I run through them very quickly, so you need things like appetite. Then there's what I call the 3 E's, the encounter rate, the encounter time, and the encounter zone, which are very important when you're engaging with tour operators and media to convince them that you actually have a wildlife product that their clients are going to see. You also need to understand the significance of the story. You need a media brief, you need a tagline, and a coordinated media campaign, and you need co-champions. So with a lot of these wildlife stories, we've had other people in the industry like Sri Lankan Leopard and Cheetah Tilaka who've run with them and helped to sort of bring in the buy-in. A few iconic images help, and this is an image I actually owe to Rukshan because we were at this leopard sighting when this famous cub called Gona Labba Madapara Cub 5 was performing, and Rukshan just gave me a sort of a hand gesture and told me where I would need to position myself when the leopard left. Rukshan has always been the leopard guru everybody has looked up to, so I didn't question it. I positioned myself, and I got this very iconic image, which we used a lot in our advertising. a big step change in our campaign was that we hired Chandrika Malge, who brought in the artistic and design skills and an understanding of branding, along with having a commercial nose. And she worked extensively with the in-house design team and with the people at Copyline like Tilak Conrad and Keith Blom and their staff to develop a number of advertisements like the one you see on the right. We also changed the composition of the team, so even the Co-Holidays office team had people who were now interested in wildlife. They knew the business side. They were very good at responding promptly to emails, but they also went out with the field staff. So with the hotel naturalists and the naturalist guides, there was a lot of engagement. There was a lot of going out into the field and ground truthing. So this fantastic image, which I owe to Rukshan, was made into a print. It was being sold at Odell, but we also gifted it to tour operators. And in early 2002, with Hiran Kure, I visited Sue Morton of Travel Collection, which is part of Kony, and I gave a PowerPoint presentation explaining why Sri Lanka is good for leopard and why we can run leopard safaris. And we gifted her this print, which then hung behind her desk, and a number of other Kony staff also received copies of this print, and then they put it up. They were quite astonished to learn that Sri Lanka was good for safari because they had been bringing people to our hotels for one night. And this is the first time somebody had come and told them that they can run 5-night safari extensions in the game lodge. And Kony, who worked with Walker's Tours, then developed a series of sort of national park tours, and so did other tour operators. And this generated a whole new line of business for Sri Lanka. Now, Jetwing continued to advertise both locally, because we still needed to convince the local industry that Sri Lanka was good for wildlife, and also overseas. So on the left, you see an advertisement which ran in Condé Nast Traveller. On the right is one that appeared as a full-page advertisement in BBC Wildlife magazine. We also developed a series of small advertisements, small because it's quite expensive to advertise in the foreign press. And we knew that what we needed to do was not just have one big splashy ad, but have something that ran every month in every issue for a number of years. And some of these, even in birdwatching magazines like Birding World, Birdwatching, we began to bring in things like the leopard as an icon to show that Sri Lanka can be a general all-round tourism destination, and it is not just about birds. So the advertisement you see on the bottom left ran in the Birds magazine of the RSPB. It's a quarterly magazine. The RSPB have a staggering 1 million plus members. 1.5 million people read the magazine. And by having this advertisement running every time an issue came for over 10 years, it meant that people began to associate leopards, elephants, primates, and lots of other exciting wildlife with Sri Lanka. We also knew we needed to get the foreign film crews to come over, because when they broadcast, it could get broadcast over 100 countries, and anything from 50 million to 150 million could view those broadcasts. So we also developed advertising for the photography magazines. And here's an example from Outdoor Photography, so that the people who scout for stories for television programs would see this. We also used every possible avenue. So we knew that when we attended consumer fairs, we need to give things away. So we developed things like bookmarks. They're a very inexpensive way for people to take away and keep, and to remember that Sri Lanka is good for leopards. So 20 years ago when we were doing this, although email was there, you still exchange things by paper. So even the compliment slip, we said, well, we don't need all that blank space. Let's put in a leopard. And again, Chandrika continued to develop all of this collateral. So even with things like the note paper we use, we we began to put this message across that Sri Lanka is a place you can see everything from butterflies and dragonflies and birds to flowers to sloth bears to leopards. So, everything, we looked at everything afresh and said, are we projecting the image we want to say? And photography had a very powerful part to play in it. So we took sort of an artistic image like this, and we said, we can put that on an envelope so that once again, if you deliver anything, or if you're giving a package of material to clients who are traveling with us, everything is reinforcing this image that Sri Lanka is fantastic for wildlife. So here's a scene at the British Birdwatching Fair, the biggest wildlife tourism event in the world, attended by prospective consumers, tour operators, press, publishers, book writers, etc. So you can see the Jetwing Eco Holidays team have set the stand up, and you can see there's a number of publications all over the place, and you can see what a big part photography is playing in visually communicating that Sri Lanka is very rich in wildlife. Alongside all of this, we began to host journalists, and I found myself not only becoming an accidental photographer, but becoming an accidental writer so that I could get the message across. And it was an exciting time because I had the opportunity to take a lot of local press and foreign press. We didn't ignore the local press, especially in the internet age. It's very important that they carry stories which are seen digitally online and which the foreign press see. And of course, you want to target the foreign press as well. So I've authored over 380 articles so far, and a lot of this was really driven by the need to get the message across. When we first began to attend the bird fair, we had very simple offerings like this double page spread. It was just two sides of A4 opening up onto A3. But over time, we began to develop more sophisticated materials. So we started producing these media briefs, which were 8 pages. So these were printed with Jetwing Hotels and Jetwing Eco Holidays branding so that we could give them away. And subsequently, I began to attend events like Destinations, the General Consumer Fair with Sanjeeva Gautamadasa. And we must have handed away thousands of this just to get the message across. All of this was made available electronically, branded with the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau materials so that anybody who wants to could also have them on their websites. So when we broke the story that Sri Lanka is best for blue, and Jetwing played a huge part in carrying this message across, again, we developed marketing collateral. When we held media events, all over the world, but particularly in places like London, we would hand the material out because it was really important for people to get something into their hands that they could go back and leave it on their kitchen shelf and mull over it and realize that there was a story. So these brochures continued to develop, and we started exploring the idea of that the Sri Lanka is the best of big game safaris outside Africa. So we talked about Sri Lanka's Big Five. We talked about the wildlife here in Sri Lanka. And ultimately, these became 16-page brochures. So they were almost like little booklets. We were still doing little things as well, like postcards. And then Jetwing Eco Holidays and Jetwing Hotels began to publish books because we were very confident of what we were doing now. We had the design scales. I was doing the photography and the text. Chandrika was doing the design with copyline. And we became more ambitious. And we started to produce a sort of good quality marketing collateral to really convince the tourism industry, both locally and overseas, that Sri Lanka is really a fantastic destination for wildlife. We also began to do very simple things alongside, like these photo softies, which are a simple pictorial guide. And again, we had these on sale for just 100 rupees at places like Barefoot and Odell, but we also gave them for free. We also developed material to help the guides, the local safari jeep drivers, so that they can put a name to things. And then to help educate the industry, what Sri Lanka has, we started developing books like like a book on wildlife itineraries. So, ideas like leopard safaris were first really invented during my time in Jetwing. People were deeply skeptical that Sri Lanka could do anything like this, but we pioneered a lot of wildlife products, including things like dragonfly tours. In fact, we were publishing so much that, quite ironically, Jetwing, which is really a tourism company with the tour operator arm and the hotel arm, were almost developing as a small publisher, and it even had its own flyer on its publications. Because of the writing and the photography I was doing, I had a number of foreign publishers like Brad, Bloomsbury, New Holland, and John Beaufort Publishing who approached me to do photographic field guides. So that was again another fantastic opportunity to get the message across, because it meant that I could write and photograph things that would be on sale, all over the world, and it's just getting that message out there. Now, today the situation is very different. So when I joined Jetwing around 2001, 2002, there was widespread skepticism in people in the industry that you could see leopards. It was the same again when I first talked about the elephant gathering. People didn't believe that there was an internationally significant event happening. And then when I broke the story for that Sri Lanka's best blue, again, there was widespread skepticism. And I had people, telling me that they've been in tourism for 30 years. They've had coastal hotels. They've never heard the story that Sri Lanka is good for whales. But once the story is broken, it creates its own problem. So with Yala in particular, there's an issue now with overvisitation. And I was there again as a guest of Jetwing in August, and I could, and have been watching for a number of years how this is developing. So I'd like to make a few suggestions. I know in a way it's a little naive for me to make these suggestions, because it's easy to make the suggestions, but it's much harder to make them work. But let me just throw in a few ideas. So one of the simplest things you can do is introduce zoning. Everybody is used to the idea that you can have products at different prices, whether you're going to buy a smartphone or clothes or a car, depending on what you want, you have a price you're willing to pay. And it's the same thing with national parks and reserves. So if you're going to come to Sri Lanka, or whether you're a local and you want to go and spend 5 days photographing leopards and doing nothing else, you can do two things. One is you can have the whole 1,500 square kilometers opened up, because that, I believe, improves conservation. Secondly, within that, you can have areas where you limit the number of vehicles, so that people who want to photograph leopards and are willing to pay a premium rate will know that there's a restricted number of vehicles allowed in. And in the other areas, you can have a lower rate. And it's not an economic thing necessarily, because if somebody is coming to bird watch or just visit the park, there's no reason why they should pay more and go to the area where the photographers with the big lenses are. So this way you cater for different interests and different price levels, and you're being fairly democratic in how we do it. You can also do other simple things like having timed entry slots. So anyone who travels is used to the idea that to go to art gallery or museum, you buy a ticket and it tells you your time of entry is 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. In Yala, everybody's queuing outside at 6 a.m. But if you said that, if you're willing to enter after 8 or 9, it's a cheaper rate, you might find a lot of the casual visitors who are just coming to see the park are quite happy to enter later and pay less. You can also do things like improving the visitor facilities, so that the experience is not just about how much time you spend inside the park, but it's also about the time you spend outside the park in the visitor center. You may be watching movies, you might be browsing the merchandise, you might be having a choice of hot and cold food. So if you look at where tourism is developed, especially in the G20 countries, and if you look at what somebody did when they spent 2 hours in an art gallery or a museum, you may find that after 2 hours, half the time was really in the cafe and in the shop. So we can bring these ideas in. Another thing you can do to reduce the number of vehicles is to have coaches where you book a slot, and rather than 10 vehicles going in, one vehicle takes a bunch of people in, and you have good interpretation so that they have a better experience. Well, as I said, easier said than done. This kind of thing requires strong and visionary leadership. Whoever is going to run the parks in this way will need political support, and you need to build a leadership team. But it can be done. Even in Colombo, we have some fantastic urban nature resources like the Badagana Wetland Park and the Asaru. So it shows that we do have the leadership and the know-how and the potential to do lots of things. And if you want to learn how to do these things, rather than sending up people to national parks and reserves in Africa and in other places where you have massive nature reserves, you really need to send them to places like the London Wetland Centre, where you find lots of really good ideas for how you can keep people engaged in even a small area and reduce the intensity of traffic going into the park. So here's the London Wetland Centre. So again, you can see a choice of indoor dining, outdoor dining, parks, and the wildlife hides. They're more like as if you've gone into a cafe like Starbucks. And there are lots of ideas here about how to bring people in and to offer them a good experience. And this picture shows a bird watching hide in the center, which is used for corporate events, and the center is even used by people for their weddings. So I'm not suggesting YAL is developed as a venue for weddings, but I'm just trying to say that you can use it in ways that you can have a lot of people coming, but you spread out the traffic and you provide everybody with a good experience and the right price point. So I'm going to conclude with this last slide, which shows some of the publications I've done. Although it's my name on the cover as the author and photographer, these books really represent the support from a huge number of people. So obviously I can't name everybody individually, but a big thank you to everyone who has supported my work. So with that, I'll conclude and I'll hand it back to you, Medini.
Thank you so much, Gehan. So if we can go back to our main panel screen, I can start our Q&A forum with both Rukshan and Gehan. Gehan, if you can, yeah, there you go. Okay, so we now have both our panelists, Rukshan and Gehan, with us. So this is the time for our Q&A. So I'll start with Rukshan. Rukshan, I'm sure the viewers would like to know the definition of a leopard. We have a lot of young audience with us today from all around the world. So if you can tell us what is a leopard, that would be great.
First and foremost, it is a cat. It is the quintessential cat. It's also a big cat. That is, it's a large cat. Most of the wild cats of the world are small to medium cats, and they number around 37, I think. But the big cats are far fewer in number. And of the big cats, the leopard is one that is part of the Panthera family. And there are several other big cats, but all of them may number 10 to 12. Other than the Panthera cats, there is a big cat that is the puma in North and South America, ranging from Alaska and the Northwest, Canadian territories, right down to the tip. And there's a Jaguar, also a South American cat. It's a kind of pan-tropical South American cat that ranges into the USA, into the southern states, but now seldom found there. But right through Central America, down into South America. And there is, I think there's one other large, well, there is the cheetah. So the cheetah is an entirely different cat to any other cat. It's a very specialized cat. It's has some characteristics that remind you of a dog, but in fact it is truly a cat, but it's in its own genus. So so saying that the leopard is a cat, it is also a carnivore. It is also, being a carnivore, it's a predator. It hunts its prey, and it's what's called a obligate carnivore. Unlike a dog, it cannot eat other types of food, that is non-meat or non-animal foods, and survive. A dog is an animal that is a carnivore, but it's not an obligate carnivore. If there isn't kind of meat or meat-based food for it to eat, it can eat vegetable foods and also draw some nutrition and subsist. The leopard, in many areas that it lives in close kind of association with another large cat, like a tiger or a lion. But in Sri Lanka, it is on its own, so it's called an apex predator here. An apex predator in Africa would be a lion, and the apex predator in India and other parts of Asia would be a tiger. So, and what else can I say about a leopard? It's a mammal. So in that sense, it shares characteristics with us humans. It grows up drinking milk, suckling from the mum from a very young age. And then it switches to a carnivorous diet, meat. When we switch to an omnivorous diet, we do eat some meat, we eat vegetable matter. We are neither a carnivore nor a herbivore. The leopard is definitely not a herbivore, it's a carnivore. So we are primates, and they are felines or cats. So that's...
Thank you, Rukshan. So moving on to you, Gehan, what are the key elements for developing an animal as a wildlife brand? Gehan, you will have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So there are a number of components which I sort of very rapidly went through on my slide. But one of the key things is what I call the 3 E's, which is if you're starting off with an animal for which there is a public appetite, you then need to, for it to work as a tourism product, you need the 3 E's. So you need a predictable encounter rate, and there should be an encounter time and an encounter zone. So with the leopards, we began to say that there's a 90% chance of seeing a leopard if you do 5 game drives or more. And with the blue whale, we began by saying there's a 90% chance of seeing a blue whale if you do at least 2 sailings during a specified time period. And also we knew the encounter zone for the blue whales, which was near the continental shelf. So you need to understand this, because then the tour operators and the consumers and the media, they know that you've done your homework. It's a credible story, and they have a reasonable likelihood of whether a person, whether it's a customer of theirs, whether it's just them visiting on their own, whether they can see that. And you also need to bring a lot of people in to support the campaign. So for the London office of the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, I developed a series of 1-page handouts which gave key information. And Nalin Pera, who sort of ran the London office, told me that he had handed out maybe over 10,000 copies of this at various events, from consumer events to business-to-business events, because nobody can do this sort of branding and marketing on their own. You need to win the whole industry over. And what Jetwing did was, having developed the product, they made a lot of the marketing collateral available to the tourism promotion bureau officers around the world and to other people in the industry, so that it became a collective effort by the Sri Lankan tourism industry.
Thank you, Gehan. So moving back to you, Rukshan, we talked about the definition of a leopard, but what is the significance of the Sri Lankan leopard?
Well, the significance of the Sri Lankan leopard is, for a start, it is one of 9 subspecies. And being one of 9 subspecies, this one, Panthera pardus kotiya, is restricted to the island of Sri Lanka. And just this one island, and not even in any of our very small offshore islands. And it's certainly not found across the Pork Straits in southern India. So it is, of course, derived from the Indian leopard. So it is genetically closest to the Indian leopard, but genetically divergent enough, separated from the Indian leopard by 2 genetic markers, enough to make it a subspecies. So thereby the importance and significance is that this island leopard has a very restricted range. All of Sri Lanka is 65,000, a little over 65,000 square kilometers. And the Sri Lankan leopard, though once probably, we believe, ranging right throughout Sri Lanka, right throughout the entire 65,000 square kilometers, today doesn't even live in half that land area, perhaps 30,000 square kilometers. We are really not sure anymore what its exact range is. It's a hard animal to count. Any wild animal is hard to count or get a census of. And this kind of camouflaged and extremely well adapted to hiding. The leopard is very good at hiding in different landscapes, even in broad daylight. So as a result, you can't spot them and count them. You can't count them by their tracks, because that's also very difficult and confusing. But now they're coming up with a way of counting lions that might be applicable to leopards. So their numbers are low. If you look at the other subspecies, Indian leopards, they're certainly more than Sri Lanka, simply because they have much larger land area to occupy. African leopards are in much higher numbers. So this one is now considered endangered. So that is really the significance. So it's a genetically separate, distinct subspecies that is found in smaller numbers than some of the other subspecies. Of course, there are other subspecies in greater trouble, like the Javan leopard and the Amur leopard. But then if you look, other than those 2, there is a Middle Eastern leopard, it's a Israeli-Palestinian area. That leopard is also found in small numbers. So all of these cats, these subspecies, need special conservation attention.
Thank you, Rukshan. So moving back to you, Gehan, why do you think it took a lengthy period of time for Sri Lanka tourism to embrace the Sri Lankan leopard as an icon?
Well, that is an interesting question, because there were people in Sri Lanka who knew that the country had leopards. When I was 3 years old, my uncle Dotwell de Silva used to take me on leopard safari. So Colombo always had that circle of people who were interested in leopards. And when I returned to Sri Lanka after 15 years in London in 1999, so there were people like Rukshan and the people who did that wonderful book for the leopard, people like Gehan Kumar, Namal Kamal Gul, etc., who were out there photographing leopard. But there was very little awareness that you could make it a tourism product. And I suppose that's where Jetwing and I entered the scene, because we managed a transition from something that a few people were doing as a hobby into something that could generate employment and bring in revenues for the country as a whole, but also be a brand icon for the country. So that took a lot of work. I remember a very telling anecdote by Namal Kamal Goda. He was telling me that he was in Tissa filling his jeep with petrol, and the petrol attendant had asked him what he had come to do, and he said he's going to photograph leopards. And the petrol attendant had said, leopards in Sri Lanka, where are you going to see them? And Tissa has always been the sort of safari capital and the hub for vehicles going into Yala. But when I joined Jetwing, none of the safari drivers were looking for leopard. They would take you in, or take the tourists in, a quick spin, hope to see an elephant, and then they would be back. But I was on leopard safari from the age of 3, and I was speaking to people like Rukshan, learning from them. And because Hiran Kure then subsequently invited me to get involved with Jetwing, I managed to work with a number of people to take what was the hobby of a few into something that became something meaningful for tourism. And it's the same thing with the elephant gathering and the best of blue whale. I think it just needs people to see a product and to see that here's something you can generate employment from. And I hope people who are watching this would have learned a few sort of generic ideas that are transferable to other things that can help generate employment in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Gehan. So, Rukshan, Sri Lanka is an island. Leopards share the islands with humans among the other living beings. In your opinion, are leopards and humans at a crossroad in Sri Lanka?
I think definitely now these two species, you could call it that, are at crossroads. But just before I get into that, I just want to add one small thing to what Gehan said. A few of us years ago now, almost 20 years ago, decided to raise the profile of the leopard. And the only way to raise the profile of the leopard was to get better photographs. And the only way to get better photographs was to understand the animal and its behavior so that you can get more extended sightings, learn its habits and ways and places that it frequents, and get repeated sightings or repeated observations. So we looked to see where this was being done. Who else was seeing leopards more than we were, because we were having fleeting sightings often and we didn't know how to extend those sightings. And in South Africa, they were doing it in a park called Londolozi. And the way we knew that they were doing it was they had put out a book called The Leopards of Londolozi, and we thought, hey, if they can do it, we can too. So then we adopted some of the techniques that they adopted to actually habituate. So the first thing they had done is to habituate or get leopards, wild leopards, used to the benign presence of humans through repeated exposure to human presence. So that is a technique that can be applied to leopards anywhere, or big cats anywhere, or even small cats. Because once they get over their fear, or their instinctive fear or apprehension or caution towards humans, then they ignore the human presence basically and go about their daily business. And that's exactly what we want for photography. And why we wanted to do photography, why we wanted to put out a leopard book, was so that people in Sri Lanka can see this cat and appreciate what they see, so that conservation efforts can be furthered. Because if you don't understand an animal, if you've never seen it, like the petrol pump attendant, then how can you get him on your side to promote conservation? Because you can't appreciate or understand what you can't see, you can't understand, you've not seen photographs. So that was where we were coming from. So Gehan used that knowledge and some of the techniques that we had developed and went one step further, which I think is a very important step. Tourism and tourist promotion and monetizing an animal is important. I mean, it has had its downside as well, but that is something that the government of Sri Lanka needed to manage properly, which they didn't. So there are some adverse impacts, but if not for popularizing leopards, bringing them out of the shadows, as it were, into the public eye, and actually increasing that kind of interest in seeing, photographing, leopard watching, studying, and then also people from far off coming, spending thousands of dollars on a leopard safari, or traveling thousands of kilometers from halfway across the world, like where you live, maybe from the USA. It would not have been possible to sustain the conservation of this animal. So then we come to this point in time, and now we are almost 1/4 of the way into the 21st century. We still have hundreds, if not more than 1,000 leopards. And their conservation is becoming increasingly difficult, especially outside of protected areas, because this is a country struggling with so many other issues, especially now, and not just post-COVID-19, but even before that. And so when our economy doesn't do well, the areas that don't get enough attention is areas like wildlife. Though wildlife tourism is important to the country as part of the entire tourist enterprise, it somehow starts slipping between the cracks. And now we are having problems with human and leopard coexistence in the hill country of Sri Lanka, outside of protected areas. But sometimes a spillover of leopards from protected areas, like the Peak Wilderness National Park, into tea lands, and leopards have to subsist wherever they live, and they cannot all crowd into a protected area where they think prey is plentiful, because they're territorial. And once territories are marked out and the land tenure of leopards is kind of locked into place in a protected area, every leopard born within that protected area, if it cannot find footing and a territory within that protected area, has to go out. And that is the spillover from a protected area, or you could say the overflow. And there is a big attrition rate. Many leopards kind of go missing from protected areas, whether it's Yala or Wilpattu, because they run into trouble with humans, with livestock. They don't have enough wild prey to eat, and they get caught in snares. They get trap guns go off and they die. Sometimes they are not the targeted animal. Often that times they are not. But there's also international trade in wildlife products, and leopards are also part of the demand for wildlife products. Exerts pressure on leopards too, and so leopards do get killed and then get sucked into these pipelines that are kind of underground, and they go into the Far East. Unfortunately, China is a big consumer, and as China's influence grows in many countries in the world, then wildlife also becomes under greater pressure and threat. And locally, people do know how to find these animals, kill them as a target animal if necessary, and then their body parts get, there's a demand for it. So we need to take stringent measures in this country now and decide what is really important, because leopards still seem to be doing okay in protected areas, but some of us are seeing some of the early signs of real trouble, perhaps inbreeding, because now they are becoming more and more a restricted range species, because they are losing land to us human beings. We are almost 22 million of us, and just maybe 1,000 of them or thereabouts. And still they range throughout perhaps half the country. So they are really thin on the ground, unlike us. But we can choose to live in certain areas and not, spread ourselves out into other areas. We do not need to consume or eat up more wilderness, because that's what they need to survive. We need to take one step back from the leopard. We are too enmeshed with leopards in this island. And the encounters that humans have with leopards usually end up badly for leopards and not so much for humans. And when things end up badly for both humans and leopards, and it's a constant thing, like with humans and elephants in this island, then it's a real conflict situation. So some of us are trying hard to prevent this conflict from happening, this conflict which is kind of beginning. It doesn't need to become a problem everywhere, where there is a fire to put out everywhere, wherever a human and a leopard are living side by side. And till recently, these leopards in the unprotected areas of Sri Lanka, in wilderness and in farmland and in mixed cultivation, wherever, lived like ghosts in the night without the people who were their neighbors knowing that they existed. But now they all know they exist, because of the pressures that leopards have. They have come out in the open during daytime. They have been sighted at times where no leopard, if it was to choose wisely to go out, would go out. But for whatever reason, sometimes in the afternoon a leopard is spotted, and then people get highly excited, because some of these people for the first time realize that leopards are their neighbors. It's actually ironic, because for thousands of years they have coexisted simply because one party didn't know the other party existed. But leopards have been always watching us and learning about us, and they know how to survive and coexist and live in the landscape. It's just we don't know how to share space with them. But it doesn't take much from us to learn that. And if we don't learn those skills and we don't put those measures in place as a government, as a people, we will lose the leopard. Either it will happen in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, no one can tell. I certainly don't see it happening in 10 years, because we have fairly good, secure, protected areas like Yala and Vilpattu. But in the long term, 25 years from now, soon after our lifetimes, maybe in the time of our grandchildren as adults, there will be no more leopards here. The trend is not good, so we want to change those things. So some of us are trying to educate our government, pressurize our government, get them to put the things in place that they need to do, because you have to have vision and see the future. And we have a choice of futures. And if we value the leopard as we say we do, we have to choose that right future for us and the leopard. And that is my message.
Thank you very much, Rukshan. So moving back to Gehan. Gehan, for someone who does not have the financial and leisure means, is there still a possibility to experience wildlife in an urban setting such as Colombo?
Yes, there is. But before I answer that question, let me just add a comment to Rukshan's very poignant remarks about how we as a nation need to learn to coexist, and that it doesn't take much from us to share space with wild animals. Earlier today, I was listening to Dr. Prithviraj Fernando talking about elephants for the Friends of Sri Lanka Association on another Zoom talk. And he brought out this point that we have the highest number of elephants per square kilometer for Asian elephants. And again, he is reiterating this message about how people and elephants can coexist. So if you take an iconic animal like the elephant and the leopard, Sri Lanka is a very unique country that we have people, towns, cities coexisting. I mean, leopards come down to Candy Lake to drink water, leopards are a few hundred meters away from town center of Nurelia. There are very few countries in the world which have this magical mix of people still coexisting, and it's really important that we manage this, because that is in itself a fantastic message for what Sri Lanka is about. Now, going back to the question you asked me, yes, so enjoying wildlife, fortunately in a country like Sri Lanka, doesn't mean that you need to go on expensive trips and travel far to national parks and reserves like Yala. So even in Colombo, so there are a number of fantastic urban nature reserves. So there's Badagana wetland and Deosaru, which I mentioned, and there's Talangama wetland. And Talangama wetland does not even need you to buy permits, because you've just got public roads going through what is a residential area. So whether you're looking at butterflies or dragonflies or birds, there is a lot you can do to experience wildlife. We just need to shed this perception that wildlife is going with a big expensive lens and photographing elephants or leopards. Sri Lanka is teeming with biodiversity, and even in an urban garden in Colombo, there is wildlife to be found if only you look.
Thank you so much, Gehan. So as we wrap up our panel discussion on Sri Lankan leopard, I would like to move back to Rukshan. Rukshan, I have one final question for you. What would be your message to our audience today in the lines of conservation of this wonderful creation of nature?
Well, for a start, to me, there is no other animal that on land that I have seen that quite captures the imagination and has a mystique and a presence about it as much as a leopard. I mean, saying that the elephant is a fantastic animal too. If you see elephants in the wild, there's nobody who's unmoved by an elephant. Either some people might be frightened by the presence of an elephant, sudden presence of a wild elephant. Others might be thrilled, excited, but nobody has a blasé attitude towards an elephant. So likewise with a leopard, if you have a good sighting of a leopard, the first time you see a leopard, you realize what's magical about that cat. So in terms of conservation, I think the world has already given a message to everybody who has never seen a leopard. It graces more tourist brochures and magazine covers on wildlife than just about any other animal. In fact, there are more leopards advertising wildlife tours and wildlife tourism and safaris in Africa and now in Asia, perhaps than a combination of other animals. I don't know, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far I don't know enough about the fashion industry, but I know enough to know that leopard prints are probably the most popular animal prints of all time, and at all seasons, and every year after year, they become more popular, not less popular, even in different colors or variants of a leopard's pattern. So somehow that leopard's natural camouflage pattern has captured the imagination of not just a nation, but the entire world. And far away from where leopards live, leopard prints are fashionable. So if that is the case, do we need to make a stronger case for the conservation of this animal? I don't think so. We already love this animal, whether we've seen it or not, whether it lives in our home countries or not. And anybody who has traveled a distance to see the leopard as well as other animals, or specifically to see the leopard, is really bitten by this bug. So the leopard is really magical. The leopard can do everything to promote itself. in a sense, because tourism has promoted the leopard, and it is an extremely marketable animal. So to market the need to preserve it or protect it or conserve it, I think is almost a natural next step. It's just that different governments, a whole series of countries from Africa through Asia, through the Middle East into Asia and the Far East, have leopards still living in the wild. So they need to understand that they have a very special animal in the forest and in the wilderness, and that they need to do whatever is necessary to prioritize the conservation of that animal, because it's not just their wild heritage or their natural heritage that they are conserving, it's world heritage. This is a global resource, a global, globally valuable species. On the ecological level, it's valuable. And on the monetary level, for tourism, it's valuable to each country that has leopards, are graced with this animal or endowed with this animal in the wild. So that's my message. We don't need to do a lot. We just need to understand, appreciate, and convert that norm, that almost like instinctive attraction that humans have to a leopard for its own good and its existence future.
Thank you, Rukshan. So that concludes our panel discussion today on Sri Lankan leopard. So I want to take this opportunity to thank our two great experts who joined us from Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom, Mr. Rukshan Jayewardene and Mr. Gehan Silva Wijeyeratne. So Suri, if we can take a sneak peek into what we have in the pipeline for next week, that will be great. So to our audience who are with us today, next week's panel discussion is going to be about, let's go to that poster, people in travel photography, featuring three great experts on travel photography, Mr. Bandhu Gunaratne, a photographer and a creative photo artist, Mr. Rahul Pereira, another nature-based tourism product development officer and a photographer, and also Mr. Sudha Shanmugaraja, another commercial photographer and a documentary filmmaker, broadcast IT and AV technology specialist, a lecturer and trainer. So that's going to be our panel for next week, discussing about people in travel photography. So for the audience who joined us today from all around the world, thank you very much. You guys have been great. It's a huge encouragement for us to continue this series of panel discussions because of the enthusiasm and the encouragement you have given us. So, and thank you so much from Los Angeles, California, USA. We hope you enjoy a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you next week. Stay safe. Bye-bye.